The conference room aboard Nexus Prime Station stretched wide and tall, with windows showing the stars beyond. Representatives from 20 different species had gathered for the monthly Galactic Council meeting. As always, the seating arrangement revealed an interesting pattern that few had consciously noticed until today. Ambassador Velthar of the Kryn Collective stood at the central podium, her silver skin reflecting the soft lights. She was about to bring up a topic that had puzzled xenopsychologists for months. Her four eyes scanned the room, taking in the familiar sight of various species distributed according to their cultural preferences. The Zentari, as usual, occupied seats closest to the main exits. Their insect-like bodies seemed relaxed, but their positioning revealed their nature as a species that valued quick escape routes. The Morphid had clustered near the communication terminals, their gelatinous forms comfortable in chairs modified for their unique physiology. The Vexcor sat in the middle rows, their crystalline structures catching and refracting light as they communicated through color changes. And at the back of the room, as always, sat the humans. Commander Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Sophie Bennett represented Earth in this session. They had chosen seats in the last row, close to the corner with a clear view of the entire room. It was the same position they always took. The same position every human delegation had taken for the past 3 years since humanity joined the Galactic Council. Velthar activated the holographic display. Data streams floated in the air, showing surveillance footage from dozens of locations across the galaxy. Cafeterias, transport shuttles, diplomatic lounges, military briefing rooms, educational facilities, and trading posts. In every single recording, the pattern was identical. Humans sat at the back. Esteemed council members, Velthar began, her translator rendering her clicking speech into standard galactic. I bring to your attention a behavioral pattern that has caught the interest of our xenopsychology division. In every mixed species environment we have monitored, human representatives consistently choose seating positions at the rear of gathering spaces. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several species turned to look at Jake and Sophie, who remained calm in their back row seats. Velthar continued, manipulating the holographic display to show statistical analysis. This occurs with 97% consistency across all observed situations. Initially, we dismiss this as cultural preference or random chance. However, the pattern is too universal to ignore. A Morphid delegate pulsed with yellow curiosity light. Perhaps humans simply prefer these positions for comfort? That was our first hypothesis, Velthar replied. But we have observed this behavior even in circumstances where rear positions are objectively less comfortable. Humans will stand rather than sit in front rows. They will arrive early to secure back positions. They will volunteer for assignments that place them at the rear of formations. The holographic display shifted to show military exercises. Human soldiers consistently took rear guard positions during patrol formations. In multi-species ship crews, humans volunteered for positions near engineering sections and aft stations rather than command decks at the fore. In our analysis of seating psychology across known species, Velthar explained, we find that most cultures position themselves according to status, comfort, or strategic advantage. The Zentari sit near exits for safety. The Morphid prefer proximity to information sources. The Vexcor choose positions of social visibility. But humans? Humans choose positions that appear to offer no obvious advantage. She turned to address Jake and Sophie directly. Commander Morrison, Lieutenant Bennett, perhaps you could enlighten the Council. Why do humans exhibit this universal preference for rear positions? Jake and Sophie exchanged a brief glance. It was a look that Velthar found interesting. Not concerned or worried, but more like two people sharing a private understanding. Jake stood, moving with the easy confidence that Velthar had noticed in most human military personnel. He walked to the front, though she noted he positioned himself so his back was never fully to the room. Ambassador Velthar, with respect, I'm not sure we've ever really thought about it, Jake said, offering what humans called a smile. It's just comfortable. We like being able to see the whole room, I suppose. Comfortable, Velthar repeated. Yet our studies show humans exhibit elevated alertness in these positions, not relaxation. Your heart rates increase slightly. Your eyes track movement more frequently. This does not align with typical comfort responses. Sophie stood as well, joining Jake at the front. Maybe it's just a cultural thing. Different species have different preferences, right? The Zentari like exits, we like back rows. Is there really a problem? Velthar's tendrils twitched, a sign of frustration in her species. That is precisely the question, Lieutenant. Is it merely preference, or does it indicate something deeper? Some species choose positions based on fear, others on dominance, others on social connection. What drives humanity's choice? The room had gone quiet. Every species present was now focused on the two humans standing at the front, and Velthar could sense the shift in atmosphere. The humans maintained their relaxed posture, but there was something in their stance that she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps, suggested a VexCorps council member, their crystalline voice chiming, humans are uncomfortable with attention. They sit at the back to avoid notice? Jake shook his head. We don't mind attention. We're right here at the front now, aren't we? Then perhaps it is submission, offered another delegate, a way of showing deference to more established species. Sophie's smile was polite but firm. We don't do submission, counselor. That's not really humanity's style. Velthar studied them carefully. They were being evasive, not through lies, but through omission. They knew why they sat at the back, but they weren't ready to explain it. The question was why. I propose, Velthar said, addressing the full council, that we establish a research initiative to understand this behavior. If humans are to be full partners in the Galactic Council, we must understand their psychology. Behavioral patterns this universal must have significant underlying causes. Several delegates voiced agreement. A few expressed concern that such research might be invasive or unwelcome. Velthar looked at Jake. Would Earth object to a xenopsychological study of this behavior? Jake glanced at Sophie again. That look passed between them once more. Then he shrugged, a very human gesture. If you want to study where we sit, Ambassador, I suppose we can't stop you. But I think you might be reading too much into a simple preference. Perhaps, Velthar said. Or perhaps there is something about humanity that we have not yet understood. Something important. The council session continued with other business, but Velthar noticed that many delegates kept glancing at the back row where Jake and Sophie had returned to their seats. The humans sat quietly, appearing to listen to the discussions about trade routes and resource allocation. But Velthar watched them carefully. She noticed how Jake's eyes constantly swept the room, how Sophie tracked every person who entered or exited, how both of them maintained awareness of everything happening around them while appearing completely relaxed. They weren't just sitting at the back. They were watching, observing, maintaining some kind of awareness that other species didn't seem to share. As the session ended and delegates began to leave, Velthar remained in her seat studying the human position. From where they sat, Jake and Sophie could see every exit, every entrance, every window. They could observe every other delegate without being easily observed themselves. They had their backs to a solid wall with no approach possible from behind. It wasn't random. It wasn't comfort. It was deliberate positioning that served some purpose the humans hadn't explained. Velthar decided that understanding this behavior had become her priority. If humans were going to be partners in galactic civilization, their allies needed to understand what drove them. This seemingly simple behavior pattern might be the key to understanding humanity's nature. She activated her personal communicator and sent a message to the Archive Guild. She needed researchers, xenopsychologists, and historians. She needed data on human behavior across all contexts, and most importantly, she needed to know what humans saw from the back of the room that everyone else was missing. Because Velthar had learned one thing in her decades of diplomatic service. When a species exhibited universal behavior patterns, those patterns were never as simple as they appeared. And humans, despite their friendly demeanor and cooperative attitude, were proving to be far more complex than anyone had anticipated. The question wasn't just why humans sat at the back. The question was what they were preparing for when they chose those positions, and whether the galaxy should be grateful or concerned that humanity was always watching from the shadows while everyone else faced forward. Vel there looked at the empty back row one more time before leaving the chamber. Tomorrow the investigation would begin. She had a feeling that the answer, when it finally came, would change how every species in the galaxy understood their newest members. Humans sat at the back. That was the observation. But the meaning behind it? That was still waiting to be discovered. The Archive Guild's research facility orbited a quiet moon in the Tertius system. Researcher Kixnal had spent the last 2 weeks buried in human historical records, and what she found both fascinated and disturbed her. Kixnal was a Nixtar, a species known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and patient research methods. Her six-fingered hands moved across holographic displays, pulling up document after document from Earth's vast digital archives. The Galactic Council had granted her full access to human historical databases, and what she discovered went back much further than anyone expected. The pattern wasn't new. It wasn't something humans developed after joining galactic society. This behavior existed for thousands of years in human culture. She found references in ancient human texts about warriors who always sat with their backs to walls in drinking establishments, medieval knights who positioned themselves to face doorways, military leaders throughout human history who instinctively chose elevated rear positions during councils. The behavior was so common that humans had developed sayings about, "It never sit with your back to the door." That was one human phrase she found repeated across multiple cultures and time periods. Kicks now compiled footage from modern Earth institutions. University lecture halls showed students naturally gravitating toward back rows. Business meetings revealed senior personnel often choosing rear positions. Even in social settings like restaurants, certain humans consistently requested tables where they could observe the entrance. The most interesting discovery came from studying Earth's law enforcement and military personnel. These humans almost never sat anywhere except positions that offered full room awareness and wall protection. When forced to sit in exposed positions, their stress markers increased measurably. Kixnell had requested interviews with human subjects to better understand the phenomenon. The Galactic Council arranged for her to visit the Earth vessel Horizon, currently docked at Nexus Prime for resupply. Captain Ryan Foster welcomed her aboard with typical human friendliness. He was a tall human male with short brown hair and what humans called an easy smile. He led her to the ship's observation deck, a room with large windows showing the station beyond. Kixnell noticed immediately that Ryan chose a seat at the back of the observation deck, near the wall with a clear view of the entrance. She decided to address it directly. "Captain Foster, you have chosen a rear position again. Are you aware of this choice?" Ryan glanced at his seat, then shrugged. "I guess so. It just feels right, you know? More comfortable." "Can you explain what you mean by feels right?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "I don't know how to explain it better than that. When I sit here, I can see who's coming and going. I know what's behind me. It's just easier to relax. But your physical measurements suggest you are not relaxed. Your heart rate is slightly elevated. Your eyes track movement constantly. This does not indicate comfort," Ryan smiled. "Maybe I'm relaxed and alert at the same time. Is that weird?" Before Kixnall could respond, Lieutenant Megan Cole entered the observation deck. She was a human female with blonde hair tied back in what humans called a ponytail. She moved with fluid grace and immediately chose a seat near Ryan, also at the back of the room. "Lieutenant Cole," Kixnall said, "I am studying human seating preferences. Can you tell me why you chose that particular seat?" Megan looked at her chair as if noticing it for the first time. "Better vantage point, I guess. I can see the whole room from here. Do you need to see the whole room? Are you expecting danger?" "No, nothing like that," Megan said quickly. "It's just habit. Military training, probably." "So this behavior is taught in human military training?" Ryan and Megan exchanged glances. Kixnall had seen humans do this before. It was a form of silent communication that other species found difficult to interpret. "Not exactly taught," Ryan said carefully, more like encouraged. "In military training, they teach you about situational awareness, about knowing your surroundings. But honestly, a lot of us did this stuff before we ever joined the military." Kixnall made notes on her data pad. "So some humans have this instinct naturally, and military training reinforces it." "I suppose you could say that," Megan agreed. Kixnall spent the next hour interviewing both officers, but their answers remained frustratingly vague. They acknowledged the behavior. They confirmed it was common among humans, but they couldn't or wouldn't explain the deeper reason for it. What Kixnall found more revealing was what she observed rather than what they said. During the entire interview, both humans maintained constant awareness of their environment. When crew members passed by in the corridor outside, their eyes tracked the movement. When a door closed somewhere on the ship, their attention shifted momentarily toward the sound. When Kixnall adjusted her position, both humans registered the change. They were watching everything all the time. She requested access to security footage from the Horizon's public spaces. The ship's AI provided weeks of recordings from mess halls, recreation areas, and meeting rooms. The pattern was absolute. Every human crew member gravitated toward rear positions. In the mess hall, human personnel filled back tables first. In recreation areas, they chose seats along walls. In briefings, they stood at the back if all rear seats were taken. But there was more. Kixenal began to notice subtle behaviors that accompanied the seating choices. Humans in rear positions constantly scanned their surroundings. They tracked who entered and exited spaces. They noted changes in room dynamics. They positioned themselves with clear sightlines to doors and pathways. It wasn't random. It wasn't casual. It was tactical positioning that every human performed unconsciously. Kixenal compiled her findings and presented them to Ambassador Velthar via secure communication. Ambassador, I have discovered that this behavior is deeply rooted in human culture and history. It appears to be partially instinctive and partially reinforced through social learning. However, humans themselves seem unable or unwilling to articulate the purpose of this behavior. Velthar's image on the screen showed interest. Unable or unwilling? I believe they understand it on some level, but they lack conscious awareness of why they do it. Or perhaps they are aware but consider it too obvious to explain, like asking why one breathes. What is your assessment, researcher Kixenal? What purpose does this behavior serve? Kixenal displayed her compiled footage, showing dozens of examples of human positioning and awareness patterns. Ambassador, I believe this is tactical behavior. Humans are not simply choosing comfortable seats. They are establishing defensive positions. Defensive against what? That is the question I cannot answer. Humans in peaceful, safe environments exhibit the same behavior as humans in potentially dangerous situations. They appear to be constantly prepared for threats that may never come. Velthar was silent for a moment. Is this a form of species-wide anxiety disorder? I do not believe so. Their stress markers are not consistent with anxiety. They appear comfortable while maintaining this vigilance. It is as natural to them as breathing. Then what drives it? Kixenal highlighted several patterns in her data. I believe this is evolutionary behavior, Ambassador. Something in humanity's development made this type of constant awareness necessary for survival. And unlike most species who shed such survival instincts upon achieving civilization, humans retain theirs. Why would they retain such behavior if it is no longer necessary? Perhaps, Kixenal suggested, because on Earth it remained necessary much longer than for other species. I have been studying Earth's history and environment. It is what xenobiologists classify as a death world: high gravity, extreme weather, abundance of predatory species, toxic plants and animals, and most significantly, human conflict with other humans. Velthar leaned forward. You believe humans evolved to be constantly alert because their own planet required it? More than that, Ambassador. I believe humans evolved to be constantly alert because both their environment and their own species were constant threats. They learned to watch for danger from all directions because danger could come from all directions. But they are no longer on Earth. They are in civilized space now. Yes, Kixenal agreed. But millions of years of evolution do not disappear in a few generations of space travel. Humans still carry their survival instincts. They still position themselves defensively. They still watch for threats even when no threats exist. This is concerning, Velthar said. If humans are unable to relax even in peaceful environments, how can we trust them as partners? Are they always preparing for conflict? Kixenal had considered this question extensively. I do not believe humans are preparing for conflict, Ambassador. I believe they are preparing to respond to conflict if it occurs. There is a difference. Explain. In all my observations, humans have never initiated aggression. They are cooperative, friendly, and genuinely interested in peaceful relations. But underneath that cooperation is a constant readiness. They are a species that hopes for peace but prepares for danger. And sitting at the back of rooms is part of that preparation? I believe so. From rear positions, they can observe everything. They can assess threats. They can protect others if necessary. And most importantly, they can respond quickly if something goes wrong. The joint training facility on Valhalla was designed to test multi-species cooperation under realistic conditions. The planet itself was neutral territory, owned by no single species, and used exclusively for diplomatic and military exercises. Sergeant Danny Wright stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately assessed his surroundings. The facility was built into a canyon wall, with multiple levels and numerous entry points. Good defensive position, he noted automatically. Hard to assault, easy to defend. His eyes tracked the various species disembarking from other shuttles, cataloging their equipment and capabilities. Corporal Lisa Hayes walked beside him, her own eyes performing the same unconscious survey. "Lot of species here today," she commented. "Yeah," Danny agreed. "Should be interesting." They were part of a mixed-species squad assigned to a diplomatic extraction simulation. The scenario was simple: retrieve a stranded ambassador from a compromised location and escort them to safety through hostile territory. Standard training exercise, run hundreds of times with various species combinations. The briefing room was typical of military facilities throughout the galaxy. Rows of seats facing a large holographic display, with a podium at the front for the commanding officer. Representatives from 6 different species filed in, taking seats according to their cultural preferences. The Kryn took front-row seats, their eagerness to prove themselves evident. The Zentari positioned near the main doors as always. The Vex Corps, clustered in the middle section, where they could maintain formation cohesion. The Morphid settled near the communication terminals along the side walls. Danny and Lisa walked to the back of the room, selecting seats in the last row with a clear view of the entire space. It was automatic, requiring no thought. Several alien troops glanced at them, recognizing the familiar human behavior, but no one commented. After months of joint exercises, everyone knew humans preferred back positions. Commander Tralvor, a Kryn officer with impressive military credentials, stood at the podium to begin the briefing. His carapace gleamed under the lights as he activated the holographic display. "Welcome to Exercise Crimson Retrieval," Tralvor announced. "Today's scenario involves extraction of Ambassador Pixtal from a compromised embassy during civil unrest. Your squad will navigate urban terrain, avoid or neutralize hostile forces, secure the ambassador, and extract to the landing zone." The hologram showed a detailed cityscape with marked routes and potential obstacles. Danny studied it carefully, noting choke points and alternative paths. Beside him, Lisa was doing the same, her fingers tapping silently on her knee as she mentally mapped the terrain. "The simulation will use advanced holographic technology and non-lethal training weapons," Tralvor continued. "Safety protocols are in place, but treat this as a real combat situation. Your performance will be evaluated by—" The lights flickered. Danny's hand moved to his sidearm before his conscious mind registered the action. Beside him, Lisa had already risen slightly from her seat, her body tensed for movement. The holographic display glitched, fragmenting into distorted colors. "Technical malfunction," Tralvor said, his voice carrying mild annoyance. "Hold positions while we reset the—" The main doors slammed shut. Emergency lighting activated, bathing the room in red, and through ventilation shafts high in the walls, small metallic objects dropped into the room. Danny recognized them instantly. "Combat drones, armed variants, down!" he shouted, already moving. What happened next occurred in less than 3 seconds, but for Danny, trained reflexes stretched time into slow motion. The drones activated, their weapons ports glowing. The alien troops near the front of the room froze, their minds struggling to process the transition from training scenario to genuine threat. Tralvor reached for his weapon but was too exposed at the podium. Danny had already overturned the heavy table in front of him, creating an impromptu barrier. Lisa did the same with another table, angling it to create a defensive position. They hadn't discussed it, hadn't planned it. Their positioning at the back of the room and their constant awareness had already prepared them for exactly this moment. "Get back here," Lisa shouted at the nearest alien troops. "Now!" The drones opened fire. Energy pulses seared through the air where Tralvor had been standing a split second before. The Kryn commander threw himself to the floor, his reflexes finally catching up to the situation. Danny was already returning fire, his training weapon, abandoned for the live sidearm every human carried, despite regulations suggesting otherwise. The first drone exploded as his shot found its power core. Lisa took down a second drone with precise accuracy. The alien troops were in chaos. The Kryn at the front were pinned down with no cover. The Zentari near the doors were trapped against sealed exits. The Vex Corps were trying to form defensive positions but lacked the instinctive tactical awareness to do it effectively. "You four," Danny pointed at the nearest Zenturi. "Low crawl to this position. Stay flat." "You three," Lisa directed the Vex Corps. "Use your body shields, advance to that pillar." The aliens responded to the clear commands, moving as directed. More drones poured through the ventilation shafts. Someone had hacked the facility's systems and turned a training exercise into a real assault. Danny's mind was racing through calculations. 10 drones visible, probably more coming. 23 personnel in the room, 6 species with different capabilities. 1 main exit sealed, 2 emergency exits in corridors behind them. The back position he and Lisa occupied suddenly revealed its full tactical value. "Lisa, cover the vents, nothing else comes through." "Got it." Danny moved forward using overturned tables as mobile cover, gathering the scattered alien troops. "On me. Establish perimeter behind those tables." Tralvor had recovered his composure and joined Danny at the defensive line. "What's happening, Sergeant?" "Someone hacked the facility and armed the training drones," Danny said, taking down another drone. "This is a real attack." "How did you know to—" "Later. Right now we need to get everyone out. There's an emergency exit 30 meters behind our position left corridor." "How do you know that?" Danny spared him a brief glance. "Because I mapped it when we walked in." "You?" Tralvor had no answer. Like most species, he focused on immediate threats and objectives, not on escape routes and defensive positions that might never be needed. "Lisa, status?" Danny called. "Vents are clear, no more drones coming through." "But the main exit is still sealed. We're using the back exit. Everyone, listen up." Danny's voice cut through the chaos. "We're evacuating through the emergency corridor behind me. Move in pairs, stay low, watch for additional drones in the corridors." A morphid soldier pulsed with orange confusion. "You want us to retreat further into the facility?" "The main exit is compromised," Lisa explained, still covering the vents. "Whoever did this expected us to cluster there. The back exits are clear because nobody except us knew they existed." Danny organized the evacuation, sending the alien troops in pairs while he and Lisa maintained covering fire against the remaining drones. Tralvor stayed with them, finally understanding that the humans' positioning and awareness had been preparation for exactly this type of scenario. When the last alien soldier had moved to the corridor, Danny and Lisa fell back, maintaining suppressive fire. The emergency exit led through maintenance tunnels that most species had ignored during the facility tour, but Danny had noted them automatically, filing away the information in case it became necessary. It had become necessary. The squad moved through the corridors, with Danny taking point and Lisa covering the rear. The aliens followed their commands without question now, recognizing that the humans had maintained awareness that saved everyone's lives. They emerged from the facility into open air, where facility security forces were already responding to the alarm. Medical teams rushed forward to check for injuries. Incredibly, there were none. The entire squad had escaped without a single casualty. Tralvor stood beside Danny, watching as security teams entered the facility to secure it. "You knew," the Kryn commander said quietly. "When you entered that briefing room, you already knew where every exit was located." "Yeah," Danny confirmed. "You positioned yourselves at the back so you could see the entire room and control access to those exits." "Yeah. This is what your species does. You always prepare for the worst possibility." Danny looked at him. "Is that a problem?" Tralvor's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. "A problem? Sergeant, your instincts just saved 23 lives. 3 of my troops are alive right now because you positioned yourself to protect them without even knowing them." Lisa joined them, her weapon still drawn and ready. "Security's cleared the facility. Looks like someone planted a hack in the simulation system. They triggered it remotely." "Who would attack a training facility?" a Vex Corps soldier asked. "Doesn't matter right now," Danny said. "What matters is everyone got out safe." But Tralvor was studying the 2 humans with new understanding. During the entire incident, they had never panicked, never frozen, never hesitated. They had responded instantly, using positioning and awareness that they maintained constantly. "When humans sit at the back," Tralvor said slowly, You are not avoiding attention. You are establishing defensive positions. Guess so, Danny shrugged. You watch everyone because you are protecting everyone. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened less than 48 hours after the Valhalla incident. The council chamber was more crowded than usual, with military advisors and xenopsychology experts filling the observer sections. Everyone wanted to understand what had really happened during the training exercise gone wrong. Ambassador Velthar stood at the central podium, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of urgency. The holographic display behind her showed footage from Valhalla, frozen on the moment when Danny and Lisa had instantly responded to the drone attack. Esteemed council members, Velthar began, we have before us evidence that answers the question posed 3 weeks ago. Why do humans always sit at the back? The events at Valhalla have provided clarity. She played the footage. The council watched in silence as the peaceful briefing transformed into chaos, as alien troops froze while humans reacted, as defensive positions materialized from simple seating choices. The video showed everything in stark detail. When it ended, the chamber remained quiet. Several species shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had fundamentally misunderstood their human allies. Commander Morrison, Velthar said, turning to where Jake and Sophie sat in their usual back row positions. I believe the time has come for complete honesty. The council requires understanding. Will you explain? Jake stood moving to the front as he had done weeks before. But this time Sophie joined him, and both humans carried themselves with different energy. The evasiveness was gone. This was the moment for truth. Ambassador Council members, Jake began, I want to start with an apology. We have been less than forthcoming about our behavior patterns, not because we intended deception, but because explaining seemed complicated. After Valhalla, we realized that not explaining might be more dangerous. Sophie activated her personal data pad, sending files to the Council's central display. Images of Earth appeared. Forests filled with predators, oceans hiding deadly creatures, weather systems capable of destroying cities, and humans, looking small and vulnerable against it all. Earth is what xenobiologists classify as a death world, Sophie explained. High gravity, extreme weather variations, and an ecosystem that produced more predator species than most worlds generate in entire evolutionary cycles. A morphid delegate pulsed with questioning colors. Many species evolved on challenging worlds. This does not explain your behavior. You're right, Jake agreed. But Earth had something else. Something that made it uniquely dangerous for humans specifically. The display changed, showing archaeological evidence. Ancient human remains showing signs of violence. Fortified settlements dating back thousands of years. Weapons development spanning from stone tools to nuclear arsenals. We had us, Jake said quietly. Humans have been humanity's primary predator for most of our evolutionary history. We survived in an environment where both nature and our own species represented constant threats. Velthar leaned forward. Explain what this means for your psychology. Sophie took over. For millions of years, humans who survived long enough to pass on their genes were the ones who remained alert, who watched for danger, who positioned themselves to see threats coming. It became instinctive. But you are civilized now, a Vex-Corps Council member objected. You have laws, societies, cooperation. Why maintain predatory instincts? Because we only achieved civilization very recently in evolutionary terms, Jake explained. Humans have existed in our current form for about 300,000 years. We've had what you might call true civilization for maybe 10,000 of those years. That's not enough time for evolution to remove instincts that kept us alive for the previous 290,000 years. The council absorbed this information. Sophie continued pulling up more data. When a human enters a room, we automatically assess it for threats. We identify exits, cover positions, potential dangers, and defensible spaces. We do this unconsciously, the same way you breathe without thinking about it. This is why you sit at the back, Velthar said, understanding dawning. From rear positions, you can observe the entire space. Yes, Jake confirmed. It's not submission. It's not avoidance. It's tactical positioning. We put our backs to walls so nothing can approach from behind. We choose seats with clear views, so we can track everyone's movements. We stay near secondary exits so we have escape routes if primary exits are compromised. Sophie pulled up statistics from human military and law enforcement training. We formalize these instincts in our combat training. We teach situational awareness, threat assessment, and tactical positioning. But honestly, most humans do these things naturally before any training. So every human maintains this constant vigilance, asked a Zentari military officer. To varying degrees, Jake said. Humans with military or security training are more consciously aware of it. But even civilian humans practice the same behaviors unconsciously, choosing restaurant seats facing the door, noting exit locations in buildings, feeling uncomfortable when unable to see their surroundings. This seems exhausting, commented a Morphid delegate. To be always watching, always preparing for threats that may never come, Sophie smiled. It would be exhausting if we had to consciously maintain it. But for humans, it's as natural as breathing. We don't think about it. It just happens. Until a real threat emerges, Velthar said, and then you respond instantly, as we saw at Valhalla. Exactly, Jake agreed. Danny and Lisa didn't have to think about what to do. Their positioning and awareness meant they saw the threat immediately and already knew the best response. From their back row seats, they had clear sight lines to identify the drones, accessible cover to establish defensive positions, and knowledge of alternative exits that other species hadn't bothered to note. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled. Every human in the galaxy maintained constant defensive awareness. Every human positioned themselves tactically. Every human was always preparing for danger, even in peaceful circumstances. Are humans incapable of truly relaxing? Velthar asked. It was the question many council members were thinking. Jake considered this carefully. We relax. We enjoy peace. We value safety and security. But our relaxation includes awareness. Think of it like peripheral vision. You don't focus on it consciously, but you still see it. That's how human threat awareness works. It's always there, in the background, not demanding attention but remaining active. Sophie added, what you need to understand is that this doesn't make us warlike or aggressive. Actually, it's the opposite. Because we're always aware of potential threats, we're very good at avoiding conflicts before they start. We see problems developing and address them early. You hope for peace but prepare for danger, Velthar said, echoing something Kixnal had told her weeks before. Yes, Jake confirmed. And when we sit at the back of rooms, we're not avoiding participation. We're positioning ourselves to protect everyone in front of us if something goes wrong. A Kryn military advisor stood from the observer section. It was Commander Tralvor, present to give testimony about Valhalla. May I speak, Ambassador? Velthar gestured permission. Tralvor addressed the council. I witnessed the human response firsthand. When the attack began, my troops and I froze. Our training failed us in that moment, but Sergeants Danny Wright and Lisa Hayes responded instantly. They established defensive positions, organized our scattered forces, and led us to safety through exits we didn't know existed. He paused, his mandibles clicking with emphasis. They saved 23 lives because they were doing what they always do. Watching, preparing, maintaining awareness that the rest of us neglected. I have reviewed security footage from every joint operation I have commanded with human personnel. In every case, humans positioned themselves to protect others, maintained superior situational awareness, and were prepared for emergencies we assumed would never happen. And at Valhalla, an emergency did happen, Velthar noted. Yes, Tralvor agreed, and only the humans were ready for it. The council erupted in discussion. Some delegates expressed concern about having a species so focused on potential threats. Others argued that human vigilance had proven valuable. A few suggested that humanity's instincts should be studied and potentially taught to other species. Velthar called for order. Commander Morrison, Lieutenant Bennett, the council requires clarity on one final point. You say this behavior is defensive, not aggressive. But how can we be certain? A species that maintains constant tactical awareness could easily initiate conflicts from advantageous positions. Jake met her eyes. Because in 3 years of galactic cooperation, humans have never initiated aggression. We respond to threats. We defend others. We maintain peace while preparing for danger. But we don't create danger. Our entire history shows that humans fight when necessary, but prefer peace when possible. Sophie pulled up human historical data. Yes, we have a violent history. Yes, we've fought countless wars. But look at the causes of those wars. Resource scarcity, territorial disputes, defense against aggression. Very rarely did humans initiate conflict from positions of strength simply because we could. Our instinct isn't to attack. It's to protect. You are protectors, Velthar said slowly. You watch from the back not to hide but to safeguard everyone in front of you. The revelation spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within days of the council session, the footage and transcripts reached every corner of civilized space. News networks across 100 worlds ran stories analyzing human behavior through this new lens. What had seemed like a quirk now appeared as something much more significant. On the Zentari homeworld, military command reviewed decades of joint operations with human forces. General Kickstar sat in his office, surrounded by holographic displays showing mission after mission. As he watched, a pattern emerged that he had never consciously noticed before. In every single operation, human forces had volunteered for rear guard positions. The Zentari had assumed this was because humans recognized Zentari superiority in frontal assault. Now, watching the footage with new understanding, Kickstar realized the truth was exactly opposite. Rear guard was the most dangerous position. Last in, last out. The position that covered retreat if things went wrong. The position that sacrificed itself if necessary to ensure others escaped. And humans had taken those positions every single time, not because they were weaker, but because they understood the role better than anyone else. They were protecting us, Kickstar said aloud to his empty office. Every time we thought they were taking secondary positions, they were actually taking the most critical defensive role. He pulled up casualty reports from joint operations. In missions where things had gone wrong, human rearguard units had suffered the highest losses. But those same missions also showed that frontline forces, including Zentari troops, had survived at much higher rates because humans had covered their retreat. Kickstar sent a priority message to the Galactic Military Command. The Zentari Empire owed humanity an enormous debt that they had never recognized because they had never understood what rearguard truly meant. On the trade station Meridian Point, the Morphid Commerce Guild was conducting their own analysis. Security footage from the station showed thousands of hours of normal operations. Administrator Polmix reviewed incidents of violence or conflict over the past 2 years. The pattern was undeniable. In every single case where violence erupted in public areas, humans in the vicinity had already moved to protective positions before the actual threat manifested. They had been reading warning signs that other species completely missed. One recording showed a marketplace dispute that escalated into violence. 3 humans shopping nearby had shifted position 30 seconds before the first blow was thrown. They had noticed body language, tone changes, and positioning that warned of imminent conflict. When violence erupted, those humans had immediately moved to protect bystanders, establishing themselves between the conflict and civilian shoppers. They weren't even security personnel. They were just human civilians shopping, but their instinctive threat assessment had activated automatically. And they had responded to protect strangers of species they had never met before. Polmix sent a message to all Morphid stations. Increase human security personnel. Not because humans were threatening, but because they saw threats that everyone else missed. Captain Ryan Foster and Lieutenant Megan Cole found themselves suddenly in demand for interviews. News services from across the galaxy wanted human perspectives on the revelation. They chose to speak with the Galactic News Network, the most widely distributed news service in civilized space. The interviewer was a Vexcor named Tixlar, known for thoughtful journalism. She met them in a neutral studio, and Ryan immediately noticed she had positioned the interview chairs differently than standard setup. Instead of facing each other directly, the chairs were angled to allow both interviewer and subjects to see the room's entrance. You changed the seating, Ryan noted with a slight smile. Tixler's crystalline body flashed with embarrassed colors. I have been researching human psychology. I thought this arrangement might be more comfortable for you. It is, Megan confirmed. Thank you for considering it. The interview began with Tixler asking them to explain human threat awareness for species who had never experienced it. Ryan thought carefully before answering. Imagine you're walking through a building. You enter a room. What do you notice first? The purpose of the room, Tixler answered. Meeting room, office, storage area. Right, Ryan said. That's what most species do. Humans do that too, but we also automatically catalog other information. Where are the exits? What could provide cover if needed? How many people are present? Are any of them acting unusual? What's the fastest way out if something goes wrong? And you do this every time you enter a room? Tixler asked. Every time, Megan confirmed. We don't think about it consciously. It just happens. Like how you don't think about breathing or blinking. But this must be exhausting, Tixlar protested. To always be assessing threats, always preparing for danger. Ryan shook his head. It's only exhausting if you fight against it. For humans, it's natural. Actually, we find it more stressful when we can't maintain situational awareness. If we're in a position where we can't see exits or our backs are exposed, that creates anxiety. This is why you prefer rear positions, Tixlar said, understanding. Not because you want to hide, but because rear positions allow optimal awareness. Exactly, Megan agreed. From the back of a room, we can see everyone and everything. We know what's happening. We can respond if needed. And at Valhalla, Tixlar said, this awareness saved lives. Danny and Lisa were just doing what any human would do, Ryan said. They maintained awareness, positioned tactically, and responded to threats. That's standard for us, but not standard for other species, Tixlar noted. No, Ryan agreed, and I think that's what the galaxy is realizing now. What's instinctive for humans is actually a specialized skill set that other species have to learn through training. We're born with it. Tixlar turned to Megan. Lieutenant Cole, there is concern in some quarters that humanity's constant vigilance indicates you expect conflict, that you are a warlike species preparing for battle. Megan leaned forward, her expression serious. That's exactly backward. Because we're always aware of potential threats, we're very good at avoiding conflicts before they start. We see problems developing and address them early. Our history shows that humans fight when necessary. But we strongly prefer peace. You hope for peace but prepare for danger, Tixlar said, using the phrase that had become associated with human psychology. Yes, Megan confirmed. And honestly, I think that's just practical. Hope isn't a plan. We hope for the best, but we prepare for the worst. That way, if the worst happens, we're ready. And if it doesn't, we haven't lost anything by being prepared. Except the energy spent on constant vigilance, Tixlar suggested. It doesn't cost us energy, Ryan explained. It's built into how we function. It's like asking if walking costs us energy. Sure, technically it does, but it's such a natural part of being human that we don't notice the cost. The interview was broadcast across the galaxy, and reactions were mixed. Some species expressed relief at understanding their human allies better. Others worried about the implications of an entire species hardwired for threat assessment. But most recognized that human instincts had already proven valuable in protecting other species. On Earth, the revelation caused different reactions. Most humans were surprised that their behavior needed explanation. Sitting with your back to a wall seemed like common sense. Knowing where exits were located seemed like basic awareness. The idea that other species didn't automatically do these things was strange to human psychology. They don't check exits? One human news commentator said, genuinely baffled. What do they do if there's a fire? They panic and follow the crowd, another responded. Because they never thought about escape routes before the emergency started. That's insane, the first commentator said. How have they survived this long? By not living on death worlds where everything is trying to kill you, came the answer. But some humans felt self-conscious about the attention. Online forums filled with discussions about whether human behavior was actually that unusual. Many humans insisted they weren't particularly vigilant or tactical. Others pointed out that even those normal humans probably maintained more awareness than most alien species realized. Back on Nexus Prime, Ambassador Velthar was compiling reports from across the galaxy. Every species was reviewing their interactions with humans, and the findings were remarkably consistent. Humans volunteered for protective roles. Humans maintained superior situational awareness. Humans responded faster to emergencies. Humans positioned themselves to safeguard others. The pattern was universal and undeniable. She met with researcher Keeksnell to discuss the findings. The data confirms your initial assessment, Velthar said. Humans are not just aware of their surroundings. They are actively protective of other species. Yes, Keeksnell agreed. In every incident I have reviewed, humans have prioritized protecting others over protecting themselves. This is not taught behavior. This is instinctive, and why? Velthar asked. Most species prioritize self-preservation first. Even species with strong social bonds typically ensure their own safety before protecting others. What makes humans different? Keeksnell displayed data from human evolutionary history. Humans evolved as pack hunters and pack survivors. On Earth, individual humans were. 6 months had passed since the revelation about human behavior, and the galaxy had adjusted to its new understanding. But understanding in theory was different from understanding in practice. That difference became clear during the crisis aboard Nexus Prime Station. The hull breach began in Sector 7, a civilian shopping and residential area. A micrometeorite, too small for the station's defensive grid to target, punched through the outer hull at high velocity. Atmosphere began venting into space, and emergency alarms screamed throughout the affected sections. Station control activated emergency protocols immediately. Bulkhead doors sealed automatically, containing the breach to Sector 7. But 3,000 civilians were trapped in that sector, and they had perhaps 10 minutes before the atmosphere became too thin to sustain life. Ambassador Velthar watched from the command center as chaos erupted on the security monitors. Civilians of a dozen species ran in all directions, some toward escape pods, others toward sealed bulkheads, many simply freezing in panic. The evacuation was becoming a disaster. "Get security teams to Sector 7, she ordered. "We need organized evacuation immediately." "Security is responding," reported the station's chief of operations, a Kryn named Velkar. "But they are scattered across the station. It will take 4 minutes to get sufficient forces to the breach area." 4 minutes. Velthar looked at the monitors showing panicked civilians. 4 minutes was too long. People would die in 4 minutes. Then she noticed something on the monitors. In every corridor intersection, at every sealed bulkhead, at every escape pod bay, humans were already there. Not security personnel, just humans who had been shopping, eating, or working in the sector. And they were organizing the evacuation. "Danny, take that group to Pod Bay 3, one human shouted, directing a cluster of terrified Morphid toward safety. "Lisa, we need flow control at this intersection," another called out, and a human woman moved to direct traffic where 3 corridors converged. Velthar activated the communications channel. "Human personnel in Sector 7, this is Station Control. Coordinate with incoming security forces. You are authorized to direct evacuation efforts." "Copy that, Control," a familiar voice responded. It was Sergeant Danny Wright, who had been shopping in the sector with his family. "We've already established perimeter control at major intersections, directing civilians to nearest escape pods based on species mobility. Estimate 8 minutes for complete evacuation. 8 minutes." They had turned a disaster into a managed emergency in less than 2 minutes, simply by being themselves. Velthar watched as the humans worked. They had automatically positioned themselves at critical points throughout the sector. They were directing panicked aliens with calm authority. They were maintaining order in chaos, and they were doing it without any formal coordination or planning. "How are they organizing so effectively?" Velkar asked, watching the same monitors. "There is no command structure, no communication network, yet they are acting as a unified force." "Because they do this instinctively," Velthar replied. "Watch their positioning." Every human had gravitated to a position where they could see multiple corridors or control access to critical areas. They were maintaining their constant awareness, and that awareness allowed them to coordinate without explicit communication. Each human knew what the others could see, what areas they controlled, and how to direct traffic without creating bottlenecks. In Pod Bay 2, Ryan Foster was loading civilians into escape pods with calm efficiency. "Vexcore family here, you're in Pod 3. Morphid, you need Pod 5, the seats are configured for your physiology. Centauri, Pod 1 is ready for you." A young Centauri child separated from her parents was crying in terror. Ryan picked her up gently. "Hey, it's okay. We're going to find your parents. Lisa!" Lieutenant Megan Cole appeared from the crowd. "Got them. Parents are in Pod 2. Told them we'd bring their daughter." Ryan carried the child to the pod, reuniting her with her parents. The Centauri father clutched his daughter and looked at Ryan with gratitude beyond words. Ryan just nodded and returned to evacuation duties. At a sealed bulkhead, Sophie Bennett was managing a growing crowd of civilians who had run the wrong direction in their panic. The bulkhead was locked, and the corridor behind them was venting atmosphere. They were trapped. "Control, this is Lieutenant Bennett at Bulkhead 7 Delta. I have approximately 200 civilians trapped. The bulkhead is sealed and we're losing atmosphere. I need an override or an alternative route." Velkar checked his systems. "Bulkhead 7 Delta is emergency sealed. I cannot override without compromising hull integrity. There is no alternative route from your position. Sophie looked at the growing crowd of terrified aliens. Children crying. Adults frozen in shock. They had maybe 5 minutes before the atmosphere became critical. Then I need to go through the bulkhead manually, Sophie said calmly. That is impossible, Velkar responded. Emergency bulkheads are reinforced steel. They cannot be manually opened. I'm a human from a death world, Sophie replied. Watch what we consider impossible. She examined the bulkhead's seam, running her hands along the edge where the door met the frame. Standard emergency doors had a manual override, but it required tools and strength to access. She pulled her multi-tool from her belt and began working on the access panel. Velthar watched in amazement as Sophie forced open the manual override mechanism. It was designed to be accessible only with proper tools and optimal conditions, but Sophie was making it work through sheer determination and problem-solving. I need leverage, Sophie called out. Several civilians rushed to help, and together they began forcing the massive bulkhead door open. It moved slowly, impossibly, creating a gap just wide enough for individuals to squeeze through. Go. Everyone through. Move fast, but don't panic. Sophie directed the civilians through the gap, one by one, to safety on the other side where another human was waiting to guide them to escape pods. She held the door open through pure physical strength as the last civilians squeezed through. Only when everyone else was safe did she let go and slide through herself, moments before the atmosphere in the corridor became completely unbreathable. Across Sector 7, similar scenes played out. Humans doing what needed to be done to protect others, regardless of personal risk. They maintained order in chaos, directed evacuation with calm authority, and placed themselves between danger and those who could not protect themselves. Station security forces arrived 4 minutes after the breach, as estimated. They found the evacuation already well organized, with humans at every critical control point, directing the flow of civilians to safety. Security is here, Danny reported to control, transferring command to station personnel. All civilians are accounted for except 7 individuals we're still searching for in the less accessible areas. Acknowledged, Velthar replied. Stand down, Sergeant Wright. Let security handle the remaining search. Negative, Control. We've got eyes on possible locations for the missing civilians. We'll assist with search and extraction. Of course they would, Velthar thought. Humans didn't stand down until everyone was safe. The evacuation concluded with 0 casualties. 3,000 civilians evacuated in 8 minutes from a catastrophic hull breach. The damage control team sealed the breach, and gradually, Sector 7 was repressurized and reopened. Velthar called an emergency council session that evening. Every delegate present had watched the crisis unfold. They had seen human civilians transform into an organized emergency response force in seconds. They had seen instinctive protective behavior save thousands of lives. Commander Jake Morrison stood before the council, looking tired but composed. He had been in a different sector during the crisis but had responded immediately, helping coordinate human personnel from station control. Commander Morrison, Velthar began, the council has reviewed the response to today's emergency. We have questions. Of course, Ambassador, Jake replied. Human civilians with no formal emergency training organized an evacuation that our own security forces could not have managed faster. How? Jake considered his answer carefully. Because every human in that sector did exactly what they always do. They assessed the situation, positioned themselves to help, and protected those who needed protection. There was no formal coordination because none was needed. Every human knew what needed to be done and did it. Sergeant Wright established perimeter control at intersections without orders, a Zentari delegate noted. How did he know to do this? Because from those positions he could direct traffic to escape pods without creating bottlenecks, Jake explained. It's basic crowd control. Any human with situational awareness would have chosen those same positions. Lieutenant Cole forced open an emergency bulkhead that was designed to be impossible to open manually, Velkar added. We have reviewed the footage. She accomplished something our engineers say should not have been possible. Jake smiled slightly. Humans from Earth learned a long time ago that impossible usually just means difficult. When people's lives are at stake, we find ways to do difficult things. A Vex Corps delegate spoke up. What strikes the Council most profoundly is that human personnel prioritized protecting others over protecting themselves. We have footage of Lieutenant Bennett holding open that massive door while civilians,